Hello everyone, I'm Ankit and you're watching StudyIQ IS English. Last Saturday, US captured Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro, and this has created flutter across the globe. Now, I need to understand this unilateral decision by US to capture another country's president raises certain issues. Whether this operation was entirely legal or not, or how it creates or how it has implications on other countries across the globe, including around India, that is what we are going to understand in our today's video. And the notes which I will be using in our today's session, in case if you want to download them, you can go to a particular Telegram channel called as ATS Live. And while you're at it, please do not forget to subscribe to the channel also. Now, Nicolás Maduro was ruling over Venezuela for the past 13 years, and his rule created a lot of controversies. Some say he was violating human rights of the people of Venezuela. Others allege that his last election was not actually free and fair, and it was actually the opposition who should have won the election. So this was the controversies lying to the tenure of Nicolás Maduro. Now, his tenure was brought to an abrupt end by the decision of US to capture him and his wife, and he was taken back to United States. Now, in our today's video, we'll try to understand first of all who and what was the politics of Nicolás Maduro, what or why has US intervened in the internal matter of Venezuela, and how does it affect other countries across the globe, including India. So all of these issues we are going to cover in great detail so that you do not have to refer to any other source pertaining to this very matter that has become across the globe or that has come across the news in the globe, right? Now, let us start by understanding who is actually Nicolás Maduro. What was his politics all about, right? Now, he emerged from a working class trade union background. And because of this, his ideology of politics was leftist ideology. So, this was the primary reason why he came under the crosshairs of United States. Now, one of the allegations that was made against him, that after getting elected as president and the successor of the very popular Hugo Chavez, he was involved in electoral malpractices. And because of this electoral malpractices, the opposition of the Venezuela was denied the rightful power in the country of Venezuela. Similarly, his tenure also coincided with a very brutal economic collapse that witnessed the economy of Venezuela. So much so that Venezuela witnessed hyperinflation. There was shortage of essential commodities like food and medicine, for which Venezuela has to depend on imports, and this created or this led to huge infant mortality. Similarly, there was also rising crime and societal tensions, which was a consequence of bad state of economy in Venezuela. So all of this was squarely relating to the tenure of Nicolás Maduro. Now, what happened? The reason of this collapse in the economy of Venezuela, according to Nicolás Maduro, US was responsible for it. Similarly, US and other Western countries have also said that Nicolás Maduro, when he was president of Venezuela, committed authoritarianism, that he actually curbed the dissent that emerged in the society. He also was involved in human rights abuses. He was also involved in electoral fraud. Now, according to many human rights experts, because of all this, most Venezuelans now live in poverty. Millions have faced humanitarian crisis, and they've faced shortage of essential goods like food and medicine. Similarly, as many as 8 million people have fled Venezuela in search of better opportunities. So all of this characterized the tenure of Nicolás Maduro. Now, I need to understand how does a country like US fits in the internal politics of Venezuela. Now, the stated aim of United States when they abducted the president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, the operation's name was Operation Absolute Resolve. Now, why would a country like US would get involved in an internal matter of Venezuelan politics? So, prima facie, if we look at it, this is a matter between Nicolás Maduro and the people of Venezuela. So, what is in it for US to get themselves involved in the politics of Venezuela? That is what we need to understand. Because prima facie, this is Venezuela's internal matter. Now, US justifies its intervention in the politics of Venezuela based on the foreign policy philosophy known as Monroe Doctrine. Now, this was a unilateral foreign policy declaration by the United States, which says that the entire Western Hemisphere, including North America, Central America, and South America, that is Latin America, is the sphere of influence of United States. So, US follows an imperialistic attitude in the politics of Latin America. It says whatever happens in Latin America directly or indirectly affects the interest of United States. So that is why US justifies its intervention in the politics of Venezuela. Similarly, it also subscribes that any external interference in the politics of Latin America would be unacceptable to United States. And when just few hours before the abduction, when Nicolas Maduro met Chinese diplomats, it was seen as a grave violation by the United States. The violation of what? The violation of Monroe Doctrine. So this was the justification of United States why they intervened in the politics of Venezuela. Whether this is right or wrong, we'll try to understand in a matter of few minutes. Similarly, US also stated that because of Nicolas Maduro, there has been huge influx of drugs that originated from Latin American countries into the United States, and it led to deaths of many people in the United States, right? So this was the justification given by United States. First was Monroe Doctrine. Second was huge influx of drugs coming from Latin America, for which they held Nicolas Maduro responsible. Now, naturally, there were many criticisms of this unilateral action by US, which was done without the sanctions of United Nations or the United Nations Security Council. Many people say that this action by US is a grave violation of Venezuela's sovereignty. Some say US in that matter has violated the UN's charter, and some say that it would have long-term impacts on the idea of rules-based world order, which the US has violated by engineering the Maduro's removal from the internal politics of Venezuela. So let us understand this issue in great detail. First, you need to understand there is a particular article in the UN Charter called as Article 2.4, and this article states that all members of the UN, they shall refrain from committing violence or using force against any state when it leads to or when it violates a nation's territorial integrity or it violates that nation's political independence. Because according to UN Charter, all countries have what is called as sovereign equality. So one country for that matter can't commit an aggression on another country if it were to violate in territorial integrity or its political independence. But there is an exception to this rule, which is highlighted under Article 51 of the same UN Charter. Article 51 of the UN Charter says that in case of any armed attack which occurs according or on any UN member, a country has a right to have self-defense. So in self-defense, you can attack a country, but you can't unilaterally attack any country without any provocation. Now, US stated that when Venezuela or Nicolas Maduro favored for sending of drugs into the United States, this was a rightful way of committing self-defense. But many legal experts think otherwise. They said that this is not a condition which would meet the threshold for armed attack, even after the fact that narcotics or its import into US has led to death of many people in the country of politics. Because according to international law, only if there is a kinetic assault which is done using the armed force or any other such matter, only this would qualify as a trigger for self-defense. And also, if you have to respond to any attack, then you have to take sanctions of the United Nations Security Council. But either of these two conditions were not fulfilled, and US justified their intervention under the pretext of drug trafficking, which is not a right ground or not a legal ground to act under self-defense. So this was the first way how US violated the international legal provisions and UN Charter by committing aggression against the Venezuela. Similarly, US military action in Venezuela under the pretext of human rights violation and democratic violation also violates the sovereign integrity and sovereign equality principle that is highlighted in the UN Charter. First of all, when UN conducted air and ground strikes, it directly undermines the territorial integrity of a UN member, which Venezuela is. Similarly, by interfering in the political independence, by forcibly removing a sitting president of an independent country, US has violated the sovereign equality principle and territorial integrity principle of the Venezuela. So Monroe Doctrine cannot be used as a justification or an excuse by any country to violate or to bypass what is Article 2.4 of the UN Charter, which I said prohibits any UN member from committing a unilateral action against any country without provocation, right? So that is why both legally and morally US's intervention is unjustified. Now let us understand what is the legal or what might be the precedent of this unilateral intervention by the United States. Now, when US has intervened aggression against any independent country, don't you think this would also send a signal to other countries across the globe that they may get emboldened? For countries like China, they might conduct certain military actions against Taiwan using the same excuse that US used, right? So this might set a negative precedent which can be used by other countries who have imperialistic objectives like China to conduct aggression against other small countries like Taiwan. So this might have set a negative precedent. Now, do you know there is a hidden reason for US's intervention? I will tell you that. Just read what Donald Trump said after the intervention by US. Donald Trump said that now Washington, that is United States, it would take control of Venezuela's oil sector, and that American oil majors would pump in billions of dollars to revive the struggling Venezuela's oil industry and fix its broken oil infrastructure. So might be wondering, why is in it, or what is in it for United States in, or what's the stake of United States in Venezuela's oil industry, right? So let us understand what's big thing about Venezuela's oil industry. Now I have to understand the Venezuela has world's largest reserves of crude oil globally. Now, you need to understand the total reserve that is estimated as Venezuela is somewhere around 300 billion barrels, which is about 20% of all crude oil reserves across the globe. But on one hand, when Venezuela has world's largest reserve of crude oil, and on the other hand, Venezuela only produces about 1 million barrels per day, which is about 1% of total global oil production, which is somewhat over 100 million barrels per day. Now, you must be wondering, on the other hand, when Saudi Arabia, which is world's largest exporter of crude oil, it is world's second largest, or it has world's second largest proven oil reserve. So why is Venezuela unable to justify its largest oil reserves by not so much producing so much oil as compared to other countries like Saudi Arabia? And there is a very good reason behind it. Because the relative insignificant oil production done by Venezuela is due to several factors. The primary factor is the imposition of US sanctions. Now, when US sanctioned the Venezuela country from exporting its crude oil to other countries, this has constrained the energy exports of Venezuela, contributing to its economic crisis that we have understood earlier on. Similarly, the severe economic crisis in Venezuela also meant that the government of Venezuela was unable to invest in infrastructure of the oil production in the country, contributing to very low amount of exports as compared to other big countries like Saudi Arabia. So this is why the exports of oil from Venezuela is quite insignificant as compared to its total proven oil reserves, which is the world's largest. So you can understand Venezuela has 20% of reserves, but it only exports 1% of total oil across the globe. Now, if Trump's intention is that the Venezuela's oil industry would turn into a very big oil product, especially after the American companies make significant investment and create a modern infrastructure. Now, if it were to fructify, it would lead, or it would open up the Venezuela's oil sector for more investments, not just from American companies, but also from other companies, including Indian oil companies. So if it would happen, it would bring good news to the crude oil availability across the globe. What would happen that if more crude oil were to be supplied in the international market, it would lead to calming down or moderating of the global crude oil prices, which we have seen has a habit of being volatile across the globe due to several conflicts. Similarly, you need to understand what's in it for India also. Now, morally and diplomatically, you can understand India would be against such kind of a interventionist approach when it is done by a country like US. But economically, India would benefit, because if US and Venezuela's new leadership can negotiating a way so that the supply of crude oil from Venezuela increases in the global market, more and more Venezuela oil would freely flow into the international market, and naturally some of them would come to India. And as India depends on 88% of total imports of its crude oil requirements, naturally it is a good news for India, because India also wants to diversify its crude oil supply. And as India is continuously importing crude oil from Russia and it has been brought under several sanctions by US, that is why India would want to diversify, and naturally the option for importing crude oil from Venezuela would open up. Right now, before the threat of US sanctions, India was one of the biggest importer of crude oil from Venezuela. Venezuela was the 5th largest supplier of crude oil to India back in 2019. But naturally, this went down after US threatened us with sanctions. Now you need to understand, before the sanctions was imposed, one of the private players in our country, that is Reliance Industries, was one of the major importers of crude oil from Venezuela. But after the sanctions was imposed, they were reduced, and naturally RIL had to source crude oil from other locations. Similarly, because of the sanctions, one of our PSUs, ONGC Videsh, which is an investment arm of Oil and Natural Gas Corporation, their $500 million worth of dividends, they are stuck in Venezuelan's economy. So if this deal were to materialize, ONGC Videsh would get their 500 millions back, and it would also create more opportunities for companies like RIL, or for that matter ONGC Videsh, to invest more in the Venezuela's oil and gas sector. So all in all, diplomatically and morally, India is against this intervention. But you need to understand, when it comes to economic benefits, India is a major importer of crude oil. And if this deal were to materialize, that is, more supply of Venezuelan crude oil would ensure in the global markets. This is a good news for India. Understood? Now, before we solve a PYQ, which straight away appeared on the economy and oil and gas sector of Venezuela in the prelims examination, I have a very important announcement. Now, a new batch, that is a January 2026 batch, would start in our resolution batches. I would take economy classes on those batches. Yeah, and this batch are of two separate batches. For 2027 there's one, and 2028 there's another. Now, in these batches, that are foundation batches, we provide you not just the live classes, but you also get access to recorded lectures. After you've done through the subjects, naturally you would have doubts. You can address those doubts by having one-on-one mentorship session. Similarly, to practice your learning, you also get access to prelims and mains test series. So all of them are exclusive part of our resolution batches. So this is a one-stop solution for everything that is GS and CSAT for our UPSC needs, be it interview, be it mains, or be it prelims related knowledge, right? Now, if you use the code ATS Live, you're going to get maximum discounts on all the courses, not just these free to air foundation batches, but also on optional courses. So please keep that in mind. Now, this is the question that appeared in 2024. There are two statements regarding Venezuela's rapid recovery from economic crisis and Venezuela's oil reserves. Please do let me know the correct answers in the comment section. The ones who get it right would get a thumbs up from my side. And don't you think this kind of a measure, when it's done by US on countries like Iraq, countries like Afghanistan, or now for that matter countries like Venezuela, don't you think this violates international law and principles of United Nations? What do you think about this issue? Please do let me know in the comments. And the ones who want to download the notes, they will be available on this particular Telegram channel, ATS Live. So I'll see you again. Please do not forget to subscribe to the channel also, and also this YouTube channel. We'll see each other again. Please have a very good night.